And Parnell now pledged himself to regard this Home Rule, a parliament in Dublin for all Ireland with limited domestic powers only, as giving Ireland all the sense of national pride she needed.
We look upon the provision of this bill as a final settlement of this question, and I believe that the Irish people have accepted it as such a settlement. Not a single dissentient voice has been raised against the bill by any Irishman holding national opinions.
But what about those not holding national opinions? About 1/4 of the entire Irish population, concentrated mainly in Ulster. They were already beginning to drill and threaten to resist any attempt by the government to impose Home Rule upon them.
I think the best compliment I can pay to those who have threatened us is to take no notice of the threats, to treat them as momentary ebullitions which will pass away with the fears from which they spring. I cannot conceal my conviction that the voice of Ireland as a whole is constitutionally spoken. I cannot say it is otherwise. When 5/6 of its lawfully chosen representatives are of one mind on this matter. I cannot allow it to be said that a Protestant minority in Ulster or elsewhere is to rule the question at large for Ireland. I'm aware of no constitutional doctrine tolerable on which such a conclusion could be adopted or justified. Various schemes have been proposed, including the exclusion of a portion of Ulster from the operation of the bill, or a separate autonomy for that portion of Ulster. But no one of these has appeared to us to be completely justified, either upon its merits or by the weight of opinion supporting and recommending it, as to warrant our including it in the bill and proposing it to Parliament upon our responsibility.
On the question of the Ulster Protestants, Parnell used the strongest argument of all for nationalist Irishmen wanting to include Protestants in the new Home Rule Ireland.
We cannot give up a single Irishman. We want the patriotism, the talents, and the work of every Irishman to ensure that this great experiment shall be a successful one. The best system of government should be the resultant of what forces are in that country. The class of Protestants will form a most valuable element in the Irish legislature of the future, constituting, as they will, a strong minority and exercising a moderating influence on making laws. We want all creeds and classes in Ireland. We cannot consent to look upon a single Irishman as not belonging to us.
But neither Parnell's nor Gladstone's arguments had succeeded in dispelling the fears of the House of Commons as a whole, or even the whole Liberal Party. The Liberal Party itself split, and part of it voted with the Conservative opposition. The Home Rule Bill was lost in the House of Commons on the second reading by 30 votes. Though the Home Rule Bill of 1886 was lost in the House of Commons as a result of the Liberal defection, the defeat wasn't as depressing to most Irishmen as one might expect. The way they saw it then was that it was even a sort of triumph that a British government had put Home Rule forward at all, and that it was now inscribed on the banner of one of the two main British political parties, the Liberals. Parnell now bided his time until political fortune should once again give the Irish party the balance between Liberals and Conservatives in the House of Commons. Meanwhile, other, more personal considerations dominated his life. Much of Parnell's time was now spent living in England with the woman with whom he'd fallen in love 6 years before, Catherine O'Shea, still married to William O'Shea, but in Parnell's eyes, his own loving wife, which to Parnell was the same as saying his wife in the sight of God. They lived together at Mrs. O'Shea's house at Eltham in Kent. But Captain O'Shea, who had at first encouraged their association for the political benefits he hoped to get out of it, increasingly objected, and they had to resort to subterfuges and take houses under an assumed name in different parts of southern England, particularly in Hove near Brighton in Sussex. Parnell was now frequently absent from the House of Commons, and his parliamentary colleagues, over whom he still held unquestioned mastery for all his absences, often had no idea where he was. One morning, as they were breakfasting together, he received an unpleasant shock from the Times. The Times of the 18th of April, 1887, carried the facsimile of what purported to be a letter signed by Parnell 5 years before, apologizing to someone for having publicly condemned the Phoenix Park murders, but saying he had to do this as a matter of policy. That evening in the House of Commons, he called the letter categorically a villainous and barefaced forgery. But he didn't sue the Times. Some months later, the Times published other letters, equally purporting to show that Parnell had been in league with those who committed crimes on the land in Ireland.
A great majority of them are palpable forgeries. They bear the look of forgery on their very face.
But there was something about his denial which didn't wholly convince those who wanted to believe that Parnell had, in fact, in the days of the Land League, had close connections with those who perpetrated crime. There was a delay of over a year after the publication of the first letter before eventually a special commission was set up by the government to investigate the letters. This special commission did in fact reveal some embarrassing connections between the Land League and certain members of the parliamentary party, but on the issue of the letters, Parnell was triumphantly cleared when a former nationalist journalist, Richard Pigott, who'd been put under pressure by Parnell's counsel, was exposed before the commission and fully confessed to the journalist and Liberal MP Henry Labouchere that he had forged those letters. Pigott afterwards committed suicide. Parnell was given an ovation when he next entered the House of Commons. In public, he now seemed at the very height of his political acclaim. But disaster, in the shape of Captain William O'Shea, husband of Parnell's mistress Catherine, was waiting in the wings. O'Shea had held his hand so far because he was waiting for a rich aunt of Catherine's, Mrs. Benjamin Wood, who was expected to leave her a fortune, to die. When Aunt Ben eventually died at the age of 96, O'Shea sued for divorce. Parnell and Mrs. O'Shea had, apparently quite innocently, visited Aunt Ben in her large house at Eltham in her lifetime. They now hoped to buy O'Shea off with part of the fortune which Aunt Ben had duly left Catherine. But the family disputed the will, they didn't have the money, and the divorce went forward undefended, though Mrs. O'Shea maintained that her husband had connived at the affair.